Okay, so today I want to do something a little different today. If you are able to, please close your eyes and just listen and try to imagine what I'm saying. Today is a very big day. You're laying in bed, you're thinking about what is going to transpire today, and you do your regular routine. You get up, you go to the bathroom, you get dressed and comfortable clothes, and then you head to work. You walk into the locker room and you see your other two coworkers there, and they are also getting ready and putting on their uniform in the locker room as well. Today is a big day. Today's even a big day for them as well. Today, something that hasn't happened in 15 years is going to happen. All three of you are in your uniform. You walk into a chamber and you are each given a rifle. You stand there waiting patiently, and a man in handcuffs walk out. He is sat down in a chair. They put a gag in his mouth. Next, they put a hood over his head. There's a signal from your commanding officer to raise your rifles, and then there's another signal for you to fire. Hi, I'm Holliday, and this is Chloroform and Chillz. Today, we are going to discuss something that hasn't happened in nearly 15 years, which is kind of crazy that they're still doing this or that they have decided to bring this back. And today, we're going to talk about a man named Brad Sigmon and how he was the first man in nearly 15 years to be executed via firing squad. But first, let's talk about the beginning for Brad. Brad was born November 12th, 1957, in South Carolina. His parents are Ronnie and Virginia Sigmon. Brad has four siblings that are born 1 year apart from him. So he was born first, and then four more siblings came back to back. His mother Virginia is only 17 years old when she has him, and then she has four kids back to back. His father was in the military, so they moved around a lot. They even spent some time in the Philippines, supposedly. As time went on, Brad's parents ended up divorcing due to his father being a very abusive man due to his alcoholism. What really broke the camel's back is that for Virginia to leave Brad's father is anytime that Ronnie would try to abuse Virginia, Brad would step in and he would try to protect his mother from being abused by his father, and that would cause his father to beat Brad. That would be the rendition of what's going on. Brad was just trying to protect his mother. His father didn't abuse his other siblings. It's only Brad be due to Brad always trying to step in to stop his father from abusing his mother. Once Virginia found the courage, the money to leave so she could take care of her children and be able to move, she left and was able to find a new husband. And also Brad's father, Ronnie, he was able to find a new wife, so he would move from house to house and be with his step parents at times. As Brad got older in his high school life, he went to high school in a place called Simpsonville. I thought that was kind of cool. Brad started working at 16 to help the family financially. I believe he ended up dropping out due to having to provide for his family, but also Brad was starting a family of his own with a woman. So he dropped out of high school just to get married. I guess that was right. And this woman did end up pregnant, and she did have a son by Brad. It was just so unfortunate that 9 weeks before graduation, Brad dropped out to get married. I think he should have finished the 9 weeks out so he could at least had a high school diploma. During that time of when Brad was, a teen, getting married, having children, he also had some struggles, some mental health struggles, and he had some drug issues as well. From his mental health and his drug issues, it did cause him to honestly continue the cycle of what his father did to his mother. He started abusing his new wife, his young new wife. He ended up breaking into his wife's house because she tried to cut off the relationship, end the relationship, but Brad wasn't going for it. So he broke into her house, and for some reason or somehow, a firefight broke out between them, and three shots were fired, and Brad's son ended up getting grazed by a bullet. Also, due to the gunfire and everything, Brad was also injured as well, and the police did get involved, but they didn't really do anything. It was so weird. He ended up being released from the hospital a week later, and no other issues or charges were pressed. I probably should have looked into that a little bit more. He probably did get some charges pressed. But from the sources that I saw, it just said that he got out of jail a week later. What's that about? Why didn't y'all? Is he not going to jail for like breaking into his wife's house? No. After that whole fiasco of breaking into his wife's house, getting into a gun fight, he ends up divorcing his wife and he meets a woman named Rebecca. Brad is trying to move forward with his life, finally. With Rebecca, Brad ends up in a 3-year relationship with her. Brad is still struggling with drug and mental health issues, so it ends their relationship after 3 years. And at this time, he was living in a trailer with Rebecca, and Rebecca decided to move back with her parents so she could get away from Brad. Also, Rebecca also has a son at this time, too. So I believe for her son's safety, she decides, I need to get out of here for me and my son to have a prosperous life. As I said, Rebecca moves back in with her parents, who are William Lark and Gladys Lark. After she moves in with her parents, Brad becomes very obsessed with Rebecca. What Brad does is that he starts showing up to her jobs, randomly popping up at her house, popping up on dates that she go on with men, and he finds out about it and he gets very, very jealous. From seeing that Rebecca is moving on with her life, Brad concocts a plan up with his friend one night when he is drinking and doing cocaine. Plan is to first break into the house, hold the parents hostage until Rebecca comes home so he can kidnap Rebecca. Yeah, I don't know how that's going to work out, but doesn't look like it. So remember I said that Brad had a friend. His name is Eugene. He asked Eugene to help him with this plan to fulfill it, to make it happen, to execute the plan. And what happens is Eugene ends up flaking out on Brad, but Brad ends up going forward with his plan of taking Rebecca's parents hostage so he can get her attention, so he can kidnap her. What happens is on April 27th, 2001, Brad breaks in to the Larks' home, Rebecca's parents, William and Gladys, armed with a baseball bat. Brad was able to find William in the kitchen and Gladys was in the living room. And what Brad does from here on out is wild. So what Brad starts to do, this does get a little graphic, just for a little warning. He decides to start hitting Rebecca's parents with the baseball bat that he came in the house with. He hits each parent 9 times in their head, crushing their skulls. And once he decides that they are deceased, he decides to take Rebecca's father's gun and he waits for Rebecca to come home. Like, could you imagine your ex breaking into your house and waiting for you with a baseball bat and a gun? Like, could you imagine? I couldn't imagine. What, like, could you imagine you're coming home from taking your son to school or your child to school, and then you come back home and your ex is waiting for you with a baseball bat and a gun? What? Ugh. So once Rebecca arrives at home, she walks in and is confronted by Brad, obviously. And with the gun, he gives her orders to get into the car because they're about to drive up to South Carolina, which I believe he was trying to take her up to South Carolina. Not South Carolina, I'm sorry, North Carolina, to kill her. Amazingly, Rebecca was able to escape, actually. She was able to jump out of the car that Brad tried to get her in, and she basically like serpentined a little bit because Brad chased her with the gun and was firing at her, and she was able to actually get away, and she was able to make it to a hospital to be treated for her injuries. I'm assuming that when they said injuries, I'm assuming she was not shot by Brad, but I think he did rough her up a little bit. I think she knew that her parents were hurt inside the house, but she did not know they were deceased just yet. So once she got to the hospital, the police were able to go to her house and they found her parents deceased. It was kind of very unfortunate for her. You'd think you're having a normal day and everything just goes left. After Rebecca was able to get away from Brad, the police now were notified of what Brad has done and where his last whereabouts were after, he committed the murders and tried to kidnap Rebecca. The state ended up going on a manhunt for Brad. Brad had a warrant out for his arrest for kidnapping, murder, and burglary. Brad was actually caught 11 days later in Tennessee. Like, what are you doing in Tennessee? Did you really think you were going to get away, Brad? Once he was extradited back to South Carolina, they immediately put the death penalty on the table. They weren't playing it. Not at all. What happens is during the trial, Brad is convicted of what he has done. He is convicted of first degree murder, kidnapping, and burglary. He gets 30 years for the burglary, but he does get 2 death sentences for killing Rebecca's parents, for bludgeoning them to death. He pled guilty and was given the 2 death sentences. He tried to do appeals to try to get his death sentence overturned, but all his appeals were rejected from the Supreme Court of South Carolina and the U.S. Supreme Court as well. The issue is that South Carolina couldn't really go through with his death penalty due to there being a shortage on the drug that they use to perform lethal injections. So on February 5th, he was given a stay of execution due to them not having the resources to perform lethal injection. And at this time, this was South Carolina's sole way of carrying out the death penalty. But what happened is lawmakers ended up passing a law where they were going to, for just the time being, reinstate the electric chair and the firing squad so they could start carrying out executions, because they started to build up a little bit and they were like, we gotta end some lives here, you know? It was going to be too long until September 2023 when they had the right resources to perform lethal injections. So they asked Brad and a few other, death row inmates, how would they like to go out? Would you like to do the electric chair or the firing squad? Brad's execution was rescheduled for March 7, 2025 by firing squad. That's what he decided to pick out of the electric chair. And now at the time when they finally had the resources, lethal injection. And he was actually very worried about what lethal injection would do, because let's be real, Brad was scared to die. Like, come on, let's be real. He felt like in all this time from 2001 to 2025 that he is a changed man, that he basically shouldn't die. You bludgeoned 2 people to death, 2 elderly individuals to death. Why wouldn't you? An eye for an eye. Personally, for me, an eye for an eye, because you committed the most heinous crime. You took somebody's parents away for no reason because you had an obsession over a woman. Brad tried to do is like he fought tooth and nail to not to be executed. South Carolina Supreme Court, then the Supreme Court of the U.S., and they decided to keep his conviction at guilty, you're getting death. Guilty, you're getting death. They're not changing it. They're not commuting your sentence to life in prison. They're not doing that. And Brad just couldn't understand that. And he tried so hard to get a stay of execution that he would go back to the court saying, well, I want to wait until certain people's autopsy comes back from the electric chair or lethal injection. He heard that the guy that had lethal injection before him had to get 2 doses and it didn't work. And supposedly his autopsy showed that his lungs were filling up with liquid or fluid and it gave him a drowning sensation. He didn't die peacefully. And that worried Brad. He wanted to die peacefully. Basically declined his reasoning for a stay of execution. They said, you got to pick something. He ended up picking the firing squad, and they built a $45,000 death chamber just to carry out his method of death that he decided to choose. Brad had one more thing up his sleeve, and that was him trying to ask for clemency from the governor of South Carolina. But the governor of South Carolina at the time declined his clemency. He said, nah, you gotta go be put to death, man. Brad was put to death on March 7th, 2025 by firing squad at Broad River Correctional Institution. The firing squad was made up of employees of the prison, so officers or correctional officers in the prison that they asked could carry out Brad's death. Brad was brought into the death chamber. He was sat down on a chair, and some people report that Brad mouthed to his lawyer, I'm okay, before they put a strap in his mouth, a hood over his head, and the officers fired at 6:05. By 6:08, Brad was deceased. Reporters report that there was no warning before the shots were fired, which I heard that that's very normal. Like, they don't give a warning or anything, which I think is actually pretty good, because then you're just waiting and you're terrified of when these shots are going to ring out. Brad flailed in the air for a little bit, and then you can see his chest going up and down, and then it stopped. That is the man, Brad Sigmon, who was the first to be executed by firing squad in nearly 15 years. I do want to say his last words and what his last meal was, but first let's do his last meal. Brad's last meal is fried chicken from Kentucky Fried Chicken, green beans, mashed potatoes with gravy, biscuits, cheesecake, and a sweet tea. It was also rumored or reported that Brad wanted to try to get fried chicken for all the inmates on death row that day, but unsure if that was actually carried out by his final request. These are Brad's final words. I want my closing statement to be one of love and a calling to fellow Christians to end the death penalty. An eye for an eye was used as justification to the jury for seeking the death penalty. Why? Because we no longer live under the Old Testament law, but now live under the New Testament. We are now under God's grace and mercy. You know what? I do have a little bit to say about that because I feel like I personally believe in the death penalty, and I feel like it's very always situational. I don't care how long it's been. You can be a newborn Christian. You can go see God tomorrow for what you did. You took away a woman's parents with a baseball bat because you were obsessed with her and you were on drugs. And right now you want somebody to have leniency on you. Get real. Personally feel like you bringing God into that is bullshit. I understand that you're sober now. I understand you're not on drugs now. I understand that you probably got some help for your mental health and your and domestic violence issues. For you to think that you could get away from the death penalty after you took somebody's parents in a very brutal way, go to hell. Seriously. And I stand by that, which is very unfortunate because I know that a lot of states are starting to lean out of capital punishment, but I do believe in certain situations such as this one, an eye for an eye. To see that you were violent from the beginning and then you were violent for the middle, you're only not violent now because you got caught and you're in jail. Those are my thoughts. Those are my opinions. And that is the story of Bragg Sigmon, who was the first man in the nearly 15 years to be executed by firing squad. Also, a little PS. He's not the only man that was killed by firing squad. I think a couple weeks later or 5 weeks later, they killed another man too. We might do his story next. I hope you have a good day. Stay safe. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you guys later. Bye.